former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Thank you for joining the Rich Giardino Show, where the crime, the Constitution, and politics meet. I'm your host, Rich Giardino. Whether you're listening to us or watching us on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple, X, or Rumble, we appreciate it. Tonight's guest is a former guest of ours from the summer, Mario Oliveira. Mario was shot 6 times by a gunrunner. He healed and he survived. He's a police officer from Massachusetts. Mario took a negative tragedy and turned it into a positive to change the law in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So Mario's going to recap a little bit of what happened the night of the shooting, and then we're going to move on to what's going on with the laws that he's changed and a new movie documentary that he's in the process of developing to tell his story and to change the laws across the United States. Hey, you're listening to Rich Giardino. We got new program now. We're going to be doing premium content, and access it at you do locals with an S / the Rich Giardino Show. And it'll be premium contents with me included, some of the tips I can give you, some sidelines on interviews I've had with some of the people I've interviewed, also on up-to-date recordings of things going on in the news impacting the Constitution, politics, and crime, or all three. Again, it's locals / the Rich Giardino Show. Join us on that, and you'll be entitled to premium content that we don't display elsewhere. Mario, thanks a lot for coming back on. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Sheriff, for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So take us to the night of the shooting, and it was an election night. In what year?
Sure. The shooting occurred on November 2nd, 2010.
So tell the listeners and viewers again, what happened from when you approached the car of this gunrunner?
Yeah, so I had been assigned to a federal task force on the ATF in Boston at that time, and I began to investigate an individual who was trafficking firearms from New Hampshire down to the Massachusetts, Boston area. And I learned through my investigation that this individual was selling these guns to gangbangers for profit. I interviewed him. He confessed to all his crimes. And subsequent to that, he agreed to be a cooperating source and work with the ATF as an informant. For whatever reason, he had a change of heart. And on that night, November 2nd, 2010, he tried to murder me.
So you and your team approached the vehicle on, is it a quiet part of town or is it a busy section?
It's a busy section of town right up the street from City Hall. It was dark out. Obviously, it's 6:30 at night. People are going to vote at the polling sites. There's police officers at every polling site on overtime, providing security as they do in most big cities. And my partner and I and my team went up to his house because I had gotten a federal warrant for his arrest for his failure to comply. Mm-hmm. And we figured we were just going to scoop him up. I went to the car door. He was in his car. I opened the door. I grabbed him by the neck. Was trying to rip him out of the car. All the while I have my gun to his head, giving him commands. And he's yelling at me at the top of his lungs to shoot him. Fucking shoot me. Fucking shoot me. He's yelling. I don't see a gun on him in his hands. So, of course, I'm not going to pull the trigger. I don't want to go to jail. And right at that moment, when I had him by the neck, my sergeant was running up the sidewalk, and he was screaming my name. And I did one of these. I looked over the roof of the car to see what he wanted, my sergeant. When I looked back down into the car, I just saw flashes. The kid had the gun tucked in between the seat and the center shifter of his vehicle. And when he saw that I looked away for those 2 or 3 seconds, he reached down with the right hand or his right arm that I didn't have contained, and he just shot me.
Where did you end up getting hit?
I got shot twice in the chest, 3 times in the stomach, and 1 in my forearm.
I forgot to say, what city was this and how long had you been on the department, Mario?
So this is the city of Somerville, which is right outside of the city of Boston. We abut Boston. Pretty big city, well over 100,000 in population. Back then, we had about 100 and maybe 60 or so sworn officers. Pretty large detective bureau. And I had been on right around that time, about 12 years.
Now, was your brother in law enforcement too?
My younger brother, John, is a police officer in the same department, also a detective. He has 2 years on me for seniority.
So you get shot. What? It sounds like a silly question, but what do you feel when you get shot? I mean, what's your body feel? What does your mind say to you? What happens?
Honestly, I mean, I just went numb. Your body goes numb because you just go into shock. And I could feel the way I describe. A lot of people ask me that question, so it's not a dumb question. It's a good question. What I felt was the chills all up and down my body, but I felt burning sensation where the bullet holes were. So it was almost like someone was putting out lit cigarettes on me.
So what happened after do you drop down then, or what happens with the perp in the car?
I fell out of the car after being shot, and I was stunned. You know, if anybody's ever been sucker punched, you'll know exactly what I mean. Where you know what's going on, but your mind is a little bit delayed in reactionary things. So, I mean, I'm telling myself to, get on my hands and knees and crawl out of there because I heard immediate gunfire. The minute he shot me and I fell out of the car, my guys unleashed a barrage of bullets on him. And I had a lieutenant shooting through the front windshield. My sergeant was on the sidewalk shooting through the passenger window. And my ATF partner was shooting through the back windshield. So essentially, it was crossfire. All 3 guys were shooting at each other and me.
Did the guy end up dying that night?
Yeah, so he got shot a bunch of times. His mother actually came out of the house when she heard the gunfire and saw the cops kill her son.
So you're lying on the ground and your partners are around you, guys you've worked with for years, guys you cover each other's backs, you know each other, you love each other as partners. What happens next? What do you see or hear?
Well, through the hail of gunfire, it sounded like someone had a machine gun. And obviously that happens being around long enough and going to the range a lot. When you have multiple shooters, it sounds like when everybody's popping off at the same time, it just sounds like rapid fire. Pop, 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 pop. And I could hear that. And I'm trying to tell myself to crawl out of there, but I couldn't move. My legs felt so heavy. I didn't know if I was paralyzed or what. And right at that moment, I felt someone grab the collar of my windbreaker, and they lifted me up off the ground. When I looked up, it was my partner from the ATF. He had this angry grimace on his face, and he's shooting into the car, all the while lifting me up off the ground. And he dragged me across the street diagonally behind him and left me under a parked car and went back to his post.
What happened next?
My guys they stopped the threat and continued firing rounds into his car until he wasn't moving anymore. And I was across the street, essentially just waiting to die. Blood was gushing out of me. I'm hyperventilating. I kept looking up at the sky, just waiting to find out what happens to us at the moment we die. I was praying. I had a 3-year-old boy at the time. I was married, And all I could think of was my wife and my son are at home watching their favorite after dinner show and have no idea I'm in the position that I'm in.
So what happens next? Like, does the cops start showing up left and right, or the ambulance, or
I
what
could
happens?
hear, I could hear a litany of sirens, and people on the radio screaming and yelling. My guys yelling for help. They all come running to me. My lieutenant was the first one to my side. He sat me up on the wheel well of that parked car that I was laying almost under, and he was smacking my face to get my attention. He told me later, later meaning like a month later when I got home from the hospital, that I was ash gray and my eyes were rolling in the back of my head, but I wouldn't shut up because I remember I grabbed him by his shirt. I pulled him close to me and I said, "Don't let me fucking die, Joe. You can't let me die. I got to get home to my son. My son needs his father. I can't die tonight. Don't let me die tonight." And he said, "You're not going to die, brother. You're not going to die. We got help on the way." And then they laid me down, and those guys started triaging me and trying to find exit wounds, entry wounds, and putting pressure where they were supposed to, and waiting for paramedics to show up.
So they get you to the hospital, and tell the listeners and the viewers what happened at the hospital, because that's just as emotionally moving as the rest of the story.
Yeah. So when I made it to the hospital, it was chaos. On the way, well, let me digress for a second. On the way to the hospital, I'm arguing with the paramedic to tell him to take me home, not knowing how bad I was, because I just wanted to see my boy. And I kept telling him, I have to go home and see my son. And he said, "Oh, you have two boys?" I said, "What are you, an asshole? I just told you I have one boy, not two. And his name is Andrew." And he's like, "Oh, okay." He was checking my mental status. He's checking to see if I was still with it,
Mhm.
So we make it to the hospital, Mass General. I remember being wheeled in. It was chaos in there. All I could hear was panicked voices and a lot of people scrambling around. So when they got me stationary in one of the bays, the trauma bays, I had a row of doctors and nurses on this side of me and a row of doctors and nurses on this side of me, and they were all working on me feverishly. I don't know what the hell they were doing because I can't see. I'm proned out. But I can look up and I can see their faces and I'm hearing their voices. And some of them are, have cracked voices like, "Hurry up," they sound scared, it seemed. And I was like, these guys know what the fuck they're doing? Like, are these all rookie doctors? Like, what the hell's going on here? I was scared even more hearing their nervous voices, And there was one voice amongst the group that seemed calm and confident and very direct. I later found out that was Dr. King. So as I'm watching these doctors work on me and doing what they're doing, my eyes began to feel very, very heavy. And I said to myself, just close your eyes, rest, and regroup. And I did. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. And when I opened them back up again, and I looked up, the doctors and the nurses weren't there anymore. There was nobody working on me. So I panicked, and I started looking side to side. And when I looked over to my left, I saw a silhouette of a person. And when I kind of focused in on it, it was a woman, a nurse. And I described her as short, stocky, big round circular glasses, hair pulled back in a tight bun. And this nurse came walking really slowly over to my gurney that I was laying on. And she finally made her way to like the top of my head. And with one hand, she lifted the back of my head up slightly. In her other hand, she was massaging my forehead. And she kept saying to me in her kind, soft voice, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." And I just looked at her and I said, "Please put a blanket on me. I'm cold." Because I was probably in shock at that point. I never saw a blanket and I never saw her leave my side. But I felt instant warmth when she touched me. Moments after that, they were rushing me out of that room, running down the hall. All the doctors and the nurses were there again, headed by Dr. King. They were running down the hall. The doctor was screaming, "Hold the elevator, floor 3, OR 26, floor 3, OR 26. They got me in the elevator. While we're in the elevator, Dr. King was barking orders at his team to get O negative blood. Someone get this, someone get the x-ray machine going, yada, yada, just talking medical terms. When we made it to the 3rd floor, I could hear the dinging of the doors. The doors opened and they whisked me into the operating room. I knew I was there because it was much quieter up there. It was much colder up there, and the lights were much, much brighter. So that's how I knew I was in the OR. And again, I'm lying there proned out, staring at bright, bright lights above me, just kind of looking around to get familiarized with my surroundings. And when I did that, I again saw the silhouette of a person over to my left. And when I focused in again on it, it was the same older nurse from downstairs. She came walking over to me again, got right above my face, was massaging my forehead, and kept telling me I was going to be okay. And at that point, I was so tired from fighting to stay alive. I had told her, I said, just let me die. Tell my family I love them. Tell my boy I love him. Tell them I fought hard to stay alive. And she said, no. You're not going to die tonight. You're not going to die. And that's when everything went black.
How many hours were you in surgery, roughly?
They said I was in surgery for over 10 hours anyway.
And then how long were you out of self-induced coma or out in ICU? How long was that?
I woke up in the ICU a day and a half or so after the surgery. And my wife was there and my parents were there. And I had a feeding tube up my nose into my stomach. And when I could talk again and I got my bearings, I remember looking at my parents and I said, where am I? And they said, you're at the Mass General. And I remember with my good hand, I touched my chest and I said, I'm alive? And they said, yeah, you're alive. You died 3 times the other night. And I was like, what? So when the nurses heard me speak to my family, they went and got Dr. King, my surgeon. He came through the curtains and squeezed my foot really hard. And he said, hey, champ, how you feeling? I said, I'm alive. He said, yeah, you are. You are the luckiest SOB I've ever met in my life. I've never seen anybody get shot up the way that you did and survive. And he told me, I did a maneuver that night when you died on me on the operating table. I'm a colonel in the Army. I'm on Special Forces, Delta Force. And I did a maneuver where I cut your diaphragm. I reached in with my own hand and I massaged your heart back to life. So, Sheriff, imagine hearing that.
Yeah.
I was dumbfounded. My family was dumbfounded. We're like, what? You did what? He's like, yeah, that's what we do on the battlefield. He said, I didn't have time to crack your chest bone or your breastbone. And I just cut a diaphragm on the lower part, reached in and massaged your heart back to life. And I brought you back. Yeah, I thought I was in the same way. Like I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So of course we're all thanking him, Dr. King. And I said to the doctor, I said, hey, doc, there was a nurse with me that night that helped me. Can you go get her? I want to meet her and I want to thank her personally. And he said, what nurse are you talking about? I said, it was an older nurse that was with us in the trauma bay area when I was brought in from the street. And she was with us in the OR too. And he said, describe this woman to me. And I said, she was a short lady, stocky, big round circular glasses, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like she was 65-ish, an older nurse. And he looked at my parents and started nodding his head. And he said, there was nobody on my trauma team that looked like that. I don't know who you're talking about. My mom at that point collapsed crying. I wasn't putting, one on one together. I did about a couple of weeks in the hospital. and was eventually released and went home. When I got home from the hospital, they had taken the staples out of my stomach that morning. I made it home with a beautiful police escort, and my stomach came undone when I made it home with my guts hanging out. They had to rush me back to the hospital.
Ugh.
And then I made it home that night eventually with stitches and whatnot. And the very next morning, I found out my wife was pregnant. And 9 months later, on my birthday, my second son was born. The paramedic was right. I had 2 boys. I just didn't know it. And instead of God taking my life that night, he gave me a life. Yeah.
So tell them about the nurse.
Yeah, so a few days after finding out my wife was pregnant, my mom and dad came to my house with some kale soup. I'm Portuguese. So kale soup cures
So
everything.
everybody knows he's Portuguese, but he's got an Italian name. The only reason I had him on originally is I thought he was Italian. So he's an adopted Italian in my eyes, Mario Oliveira. It's got vowels in it all over the place. So didn't mean to interrupt it, but we got done our first interview and I said, big Italian. No, in the Portuguese. So the kale soup, it'd be chicken soup with us or wedding soup. Go ahead.
So my parents came over with some soup because I was on a liquid diet, and my mom had a picture frame tucked to her chest. She sat next to me and said, I asked her what she had in her hands, and she said, I brought something to you because I want you to keep this on your wall in your home. Promise me you'll keep this on your wall. And I said, of course, what is it? She hands me the picture frame. When I flipped it over, I just lost it. I started crying and shaking. The woman in the picture was my nurse. It was my grandmother. And what I found out at that moment was my younger brother, John, who was on the job, like we mentioned earlier, he had heard that I'd been shot, and everybody thought I died in the back of the ambulance on the way to the hospital, that I wasn't going to make it. My brother called my mother up and told her that I had been shot and to be ready because we were going to send cruisers up to her house to pick my dad and her up. When she got this news from my brother, my mother's very religious. She fell to her knees crying like any mother would. She grabbed her rosary beads that she keeps right next to her in the living room. She wrapped them around her knuckles and started praying to her mother to save me, not to let me die. And that's who showed up at my side at the hospital.
Wow. We're going to take a moment. Listen, if you like these podcasts and you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the Rich Giardino Show on YouTube, X, Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and anywhere else where premium podcasts exist. Now, from Mario's experience, you're going to hear what happened when he started coming through because he went back on the job and then he had some more health issues and then when he retired. But he'd been shot 6 times. And Mario, tell the listeners and the viewers what's the benefits when you, I don't want to say benefit, there's no benefit to being shot, but when you go out with a serious injury as a police officer versus a death as a police officer.
Yeah, so I'll use, every state is different, unfortunately. And I'm going to be working to fix that too in the future. So let's take, since I was a Massachusetts cop. So as a Somerville detective, had I died that night, my wife would have received a one-time federal payment, tax-free, of $437,503. So $437,000 tax-free from the feds. In addition to that, the state of Mass has a one-time federal state payout of $300,000. So that's a little over $700,000 she would have walked away with, tax-free. Whatever rank you hold at the time of your death, your spouse gets 100% of your pay at that rank for life. Every raise your department gets from here on out, your surviving spouse would get those raises as well. If you own a home in Massachusetts and it's your primary residence, they would have real estate tax exemption. So you don't pay property taxes on your home. If you have children and they're under the age of 18 and they want to go to college, they have 4 years for free at any state school, college of school of higher learning, right? And then if they want to get on a civil service list to become a fireman or a cop, they go right to the top of the list under a wounded veteran. So those are the benefits that are afforded in mass for a fallen officer, an officer
And-
that's law enforcement officer.
Ultimate sacrifice, and
Yeah.
it's repaid to the family and children with ultimate gifts to ensure that they never have to worry.
Right.
And tell us the difference then between somebody like yourself who was fortunate enough to survive but still suffers serious physical injury and emotional injuries for the rest of their life.
Yeah, so before I get into that, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. There's no amount of money that you could ever give a spouse to bring their loved one back. It's nice that they get some financial relief, but there's no amount of money that the government could ever give a family to replace that loved one that just gave their life, like you just said, an ultimate sacrifice. So in my opinion, they deserve millions. Millions for their loss and their grief, But in my case, because I was lucky enough to survive, the law was written in such a way where I only get 72% of my pay. And then I'm capped at what I can earn. If I got better down the road and healed, and I can't be a cop anymore, but what am I going to do with my life? I can't earn more than a certain amount of money. You lose details, overtime, any chance of, getting promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, chief, whatever, who knows? So I was relegated to a little bit more than half of my pay. So essentially the message that I got from my city and the state that I live in is I'm worth more dead than I was alive, financially speaking. And I was left to worry about, here I have a young family, I have a three-year-old boy at home, and newborn baby on the way. You can only imagine what I was thinking. How am I going to put these kids through college now? Not being able to make the money that I used to make. I can't go out on 72%, a little bit more than half of my pay. This isn't right. And I had a bad 2.5 years. I learned about special legislation. I don't know if you guys have that in New York. I'm sure you do. Basically what that is, the Reader's Digest version, is a city official or the mayor or the town manager of your city or community can write up a bill, special legislation, and they can supersede what the 72% disability law is and give you 100%. That existed in my state since 1948. So I went to my mayor and I asked him to write special legislation for me so I can get at least 100% of my base salary.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't commit to me, and he made me wait 2.5 years. 2.5 years of wondering and waiting and worrying of how I was going to take care of my young family. You can only imagine what that did to me. I spiraled down that depression shitter where I was in my room, secluded. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I missed family functions. I missed barbecues. I had thoughts of suicide because I knew had I died, my family would have been better off financially speaking. And because I survived, we were left to suffer this way, emotionally and psychologically. And I prayed a lot to God during my difficult times. And one night, I heard his voice. He told me he was going to give me the strength to get past this. And he wanted me to do something good with my life. And that is how I came upon the idea of starting my own nonprofit called VIPO, Violently Injured Police Officers. And I did. And with that, I wrote legislation that would give 100% disability benefits to any officer who was violently and permanently injured in the line of duty. And I'm happy to say that after 12 long years of testifying and trying to convince lawmakers to do the right thing, I finally passed my bill in Massachusetts this past year in 2024 and in New Hampshire. And since 2012, when I started this nonprofit, I've passed in 5 different states: Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Nevada.
Well, I had talked to you last time, and you sent me literature, and I dropped the ball because I wanted to move that type of legislation through in New York, and so that will be a priority. But one thing I just wanted to add, you also were capped at $20,000, that if you were able to work above your pension, you could only make up to $20,000. So even if you could,
I get getting paid that, nothing, getting tickets at a movie theater.
Yeah.
That's how people get depressed and, take their own life. I always tell people.
So now Mario has taken the next step. And one of the things, we did post your website and last time. Before we get into what's going on now, tell us what sites people can go to find out more about your story, to find out more about your legislation, and to find out more about the documentary that you're working on.
Yeah, so my nonprofit site is vipo911.org. There you'll find tons of resources for PTSD, officers who are critically injured in the line of duty. I have attorneys that are affiliated with my organization. I have clinicians that I can assign to your department to assist one of your officers if they're having mental health issues and difficulties and coping with a tragedy or illness or whatever. So there's a lot of resources on my website. And then I wrote a book. It was published in 2022. No, sorry, May of 2023.
Okay.
And it's been a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And now the book is hopefully going to be made a film. And for the film, we have a website called, the website is www.agunrunnerfilm.com.
And your book is called The Gunrunner or A Gunrunner.
Or just Gunrunner.
Gunrunner's the book. So go again with the book website you just said, so we can get it.
Yeah. So the film website is www.agunrunnerfilm.com. There you'll see testimonials of officers that I've helped throughout the country get 100%, because that's what I do. Is I'm nationwide, and I'll help anybody.
And the documentary, the movie, is not for self-profit. The movie is to fund
the movie is to really call awareness to this injustice that's nationwide, and hope to really move lawmakers and touch their hearts and make them see how bad this problem is nationwide, and have them introduce my legislation in their states and get it passed, just like I have done on my own 5 times already. So it's a vehicle to really effectuate positive change.
And so people are aware, we're not talking about slipping on the ice, cleaning the windshield of a patrol car. It's violent injuries by perpetrators against police, who are truly the thin blue line, getting thinner every day. I often say here, we're the only profession that you can shoot bottle rockets at us, ambush us, say fry us up like pigs, spit on us, and then call 911 and our dispatchers say, what's your emergency, what's your location, and we send the police officers. Often the same people that you condemned, spit on, shot bottle rockets at, we go. We don't care what your identity is, how you identify. We don't care what your race is. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care your politics. We go and we help. And that recognition is often forgotten. And I also say what's also forgotten is that the dispatchers, the emergency service dispatchers, people forget that without emergency services dispatchers, you don't get police, you don't get fire, and you don't get EMS. So as I've always said, thank a police officer randomly. If you're in a grocery store, if you're at a gas station, if you see a police officer, an EMT, emergency services, or you see a firefighter, or if you know someone's a dispatcher, just reach out to them and just thank them. You don't have to say what for, just thank them and remember what they do. So how long, Mario, have you been on the raising end of this? You just started, or are we?
We just started just about 2 weeks ago. The site went live. If folks go on there, you can make a monetary contribution or a donation or a gift donation to help the cause for $5, $10, whatever someone can afford. Obviously, the more the better. We're looking to raise about $5 million. We can do it for a little less, but $5 million is the sweet spot we want to get at, and really do a nice job on this film. And proceeds are going to go back to injured officers to help them pay for their mortgage, a car payment, whatever. Give them any assistance I possibly can.
So listen, do us a favor. You feel free to take this program and play it for your social club, play it for your volunteer organization, your nonprofit. Feel free to send it to your legislators. Feel free to send it to law enforcement agencies and unions in your state, in your communities. Let them know the story, let them know the message, and let them know that what Mario's hope is to share it through visual means of a movie and a documentary to highlight what the problem is, because a lot of people don't know that. And as Mario said, this is not to diminish the sacrifice of giving one's life. It's to ensure that those who, by the grace of God, lived but are permanently disabled, psychologically, physically, mentally, get compensated so they don't need that extra concern, stress, and factor that leads to depression and often leads to individuals taking their own lives. So, please feel free to share this with anyone you wish. There's no copyright on this podcast. And Mario, hopefully we'll have you back in another 6 or 8 months and see where we are. Because, anyone listening, like Mario said, $5, $10, $15, it all helps. It's not going to enrich any one individual. It's going to support officers who've been violently injured and to produce a movie so others hear this message. Before we wrap up, Mario, is there anything else you want the listeners and the viewers to know?
I just want to thank you, and I want to thank your listeners. And I hope that they find it in their hearts to help me. I have a wonderful team. My producers are great. They believe in me and my mission, as does my surgeon, who's still one of my closest friends. And I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. And together we can do this. I
need the help. God bless you. Thank you for your service, and God bless your family and everything you've done to help other people who've gone through what you've gone through. Thanks an awful lot, Mario. We really appreciate it.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.